I'd like to welcome everyone to the Thiokol Memorial History Museum. It's a museum that tells the story of the people that led us to modern America. Come on in. This exhibit is called Commitment. It's dedicated to the mission and the work of the Thiokol workers. There were 500 workers at the plant once they commenced with their mission to produce munitions for Vietnam. We begin actually this Thiokol history with looking at the beginnings of Thiokol. That first showcase there shows the relative size of the pit that was dug in the ground for the solid propel rocket engines. It shows the witnesses that came in 1965 to see the testing of the solid propel rocket engine. Then we move to the historic picture of Charles Monak. Actually, Mr. Monak's picture, he was the engineer, is right next to the Thiokol February 1st newsletter. This newsletter was dated February the 1st, and in that news article, it talks about the destruction of Building 111, which was a CS building. Right next to it, Mr. Monak is standing in the damage in the aftermath of the fire that was in Building 111, 1 month prior to the explosion in Building M132. Below that, you see the union, which was the United Chemical Labor Union number 832, their handbook. So we actually have the artifacts from the Thiokol era. Here in this upper little cubby hole is the parachute that they used to put on top of the trip flares. We have the longest employed employee's ID. His name is Claude Walker. We call him Julius Walker. We have Miss Davis's work ID. Each employee had a 4-digit code. Coming into work, they would give their 4-digit code. Departing the site, they would give their 4-digit code. We have letters of accommodation from Thiokol that went throughout the war. The war ended April 1975. This memo is dated 1975. Through all the pain and the sorrow of losing their co-workers, the Thiokol Chemical Plant employees, the 500 employees, the remaining 471 continued their work. They made the 81 millimeters, they made the 40 millimeters, they made the CS gas. This is the 81 millimeter unit leader's actual handbook, and here's a picture, Ms. Lois Moody from Folston, Georgia. Here's other memos from Thiokol. Another work ID of Karen Jordan. Her name is now Karen Cannon from Ohio. She traveled here because opportunity presented itself at the Thiokol Chemical Plant in the 1960s. This is Miss Dorothy Monak. She was the wife of Charles Monak. She was one of our greatest supporters of this cause. Her family was not ever compensated for the death of her husband, nor the injuries that she sustained from the explosion on February 3rd, 1971, because they said that she filed beyond the statute of limitations. So when we began this project 3 years ago, Mrs. Monak was one of our greatest supporters. She made all of our phone calls. She died recently, and in remembrance of her, her family, her heart and soul was into this project. They gave us her ashes to display in the museum. Here we have the return to work order. There were rumors or reports that Thiokol Chemical Plant, after the explosion, did not go back to work for 6 months. This return to work order is dated March 5th, 1971, 1 month after. The plant never closed down. There were always essential employees on the plant, and people returned to work after 2 weeks after the explosion. And those that did not return to work got this return to work order, which is based on the union manual, and if you did not return, they were terminated. Some people were still in the hospital recovering, and they were terminated. Here we have one of the plaintiffs, which was Mr. Pollock's, his deposition, which came in August of 1971, after the explosion. The workers would dress out for their different operations. This is the Timid mixed dress with the respirator. The CS gas dress was the wetsuit with the gas mask. And then we have the 81 millimeter jumpsuit. They all wore steel-toe shoes, trying to protect themselves. This was a hazardous, dangerous job. Yet the Thiokol workers, even with America changing their attitude toward the war, the workers at the Thiokol Chemical Plant stayed the course. They remained dedicated to the cause. They faced fires every day, and then the massive explosion. But 1 year after the explosion and the 4 buildings being destroyed, they rebuilt those 4 buildings. They had another 32 buildings on site. They retooled the 81 millimeter. They were able to produce 81 millimeters at 1,000 an hour. They were still capable of supplying munitions to 3 military arsenals across America. They stayed the course. They were dedicated. And this is why the Thiokol exhibit is called Commitment.